بس اتأكد إنه محطوط حذيفة على two line. Okay, اتأكد إنه محطوط على two lines. All right, so assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. And inshallah, today we're going to be continuing the fiqh of worship. So let's talk about it, inshallah. And we are doing right now, of course, salat al-tatawwa. So when we talk about salat al-tatawwa, what we're talking about is basically all the non-obligatory prayers. So when we speak about all the non-obligatory prayers, we're actually talking about anything that is not the part of the 5 daily prayers. So whether we're speaking about reading Quran, we're talking about any type of ibadah that involves reading Quran, making ruku or making sujood, dua, etc., all of that, that would actually consider or basically be within what we would say as salah. Okay. Now, when we speak about salah, now we're being specific. We're not talking about any other ibadah, meaning making dua, etc. No, we're speaking about the salah that we would know that involves making qira'ah, making ruku', making sujood. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about salat al-tatawwa. So we're not talking about any other ritual. We're just talking about specifically those prayers. Okay, now the different prayers, of course, the Prophet ﷺ had encouraged us to do a lot of those non-obligatory prayers and the voluntary prayers as something that would be considered as think of it as if you were to have a garden, and just around the garden, you would want to make sure that different intruders, different things are not coming in. So you basically would put a fence around it. This fence that's around your garden, around your house, is basically to protect your territory. Okay, so that's what the tawwa really is for. It's to protect your territory and to protect those main, let's call them pillars, which is the obligatory prayers. So the voluntary prayers are basically considered those borders right there. Now, Salat al-Tatawwa, there are two kinds of those voluntary prayers. Some voluntary prayers, they basically have specific timing, in other words, specific reasoning behind them, and those would be considered as the restricted nawafil or the restricted voluntary prayers. So when we say restricted, we're talking about they're specified to be within a specific type of a reason, within a specific type of timing, within a specific type of, let's say, restriction to why we're doing this. Let's give an example. So when we're speaking about that, we're talking about something like Salat al-Istisqa, the rain prayer. So Salat al-Istisqa, we're doing it for rain. We're not just doing it just any time like that. When we're talking about Salat al-Tarawih, it would be during Ramadan. If we're speaking about Salat al-Duha, بس اتأكد إنه two lines مش when we're speaking about Salat al-Duha, it's at a specific time and so forth. But certain prayers, they're not necessarily restricted to a specific timing. So since it's those, let's call them the voluntary prayers that are not restricted at a specific timing, then in that situation, that would be, hey, I just felt like right now, let's say it's 10:16 a.m., for example, wanted to pray Salat al-Duha, it would really be, okay, maybe Salat al-Duha has a certain timing, but it would also be that I would like to just pray 2 rak'ahs. Just wanted to pray 2 rak'ahs. Went into the masjid, just wanted to pray 2 rak'ahs. And in that situation, it would be just nawafil mutlaqa. Okay. Certainly when you're speaking about different kinds, let's talk about the different kinds. We're talking about Salat al-Kusuf, the eclipse prayer, the rain prayer, Taraweeh prayer, Witr prayer. So of course, those would be considered probably the most important voluntary prayers, the most important nawafil that you could do. Let's do them again. Eclipse prayer. Well, eclipse prayer happens rarely, so it's not something that is really frequent. Salat al-istisqa, that's probably a lot more frequent than Salat al-kusuf. Salat al-Tarawih, well, that's going to be during Ramadan. And Salat al-Witr, that's every single Isha. So you're seeing, something that happens once, probably every, I don't know, every couple years, something that happens probably once every 2 years or 3 years, something that probably happens once every year, and something that happens every day. So every single moment that you have a certain prayer. But let's talk about the most important daily voluntary prayer, and that simply is Salat al-Witr. Salat al-Witr, the word witr, okay, actually this word right there actually means an odd number. It means an odd number. So when we're speaking about Salat al-Witr, you're automatically going to know that this is talking about a prayer that is not an even number, and therefore it has a certain way to be prayed in. Okay, so certainly Salat al-Witr is one of the most encouraged prayers, and in fact, some scholars had considered it as obligatory, just like in al-Madhab al-Hanafi. المذهب الحنفي considered it as obligatory because of the high recommendation that the Prophet ﷺ had done. That's the first reason. The second reason why the Madhab Hanafi considered it obligatory is because the Madhab Hanafi has their distinguished definition for the word fard and for the word wajib. But the majority of the scholars considered that fard and wajib basically mean the same thing. But the Madhab Hanafi, they distinguish between the word fard and the word wajib, and considered that fard is basically something that is highly mandated, and wajib is highly mandated, but that it doesn't take the same level of mandation as the word fard, but they still considered it as, well, it was highly mandated. It was something that the Prophet ﷺ had used certain words so to basically indicate that it was something that is to be taken seriously. So when they looked at, for example, the hadith when the Prophet ﷺ said, أوتروا فإنها سنة أبيكم إبراهيم. Pray witr, for it is basically the sunnah abikum. It was the act, it was the habit of your father Ibrahim, meaning Ibrahim alayhi salam, the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. And they said, well, if the word awtiru is an imperative verb, awtiru being imperative, then therefore this would actually mean it is obligatory. So this is how Madhab Hanafi had taken it. The other scholars, they said, well, no, it's definitely an imperative verb. We're not going to be debating that, but we're going to be using another reference in order to help us understand that this imperative verb in the word awtiru is not necessarily to mean that it's mandated, but to mean that it's highly recommended. How did you get there? They said, well, there's a hadith when that man that came to ask the Prophet ﷺ and said, and asked him about what the different things that he's supposed to be doing. And the Prophet ﷺ had said 5 daily prayers. And then he said, "فَهَلْ عَلَيَّ غَيْرَهَا?" Is there anything else that I should be adding or doing? And the Prophet ﷺ said, إِلَّا أَن تَطَوَّعَ. لا إِلَّا أَن تَطَوَّعَ. No, only if you prefer or you seek to do something voluntary. So they took these two reports and said, well, that's an evidence to prove that Salat al-Witr is not obligatory, but is rather highly recommended, meaning Sunnah Mu'akkada and not necessarily obligatory. Okay, I just want you to see how the different methods of reviewing rating those different evidences basically come from one type of principle of fiqh to another type of principle of fiqh. So Madhab Hanafi has their classification of the different levels of mandation. Wajib is different than fard, but the majority would say no, wajib and fard are really the same thing. Okay, all right. So let's see. All the Muslim scholars, they basically considered that witr is highly mandated and that we should not leave witr. And in fact, some scholars had considered that if a person frequently leaves Salat al-Witr, that their witness is not accepted. Well, just like in Imam Ahmad. Let's quote right here and say what Imam Ahmad had said. Imam Ahmad had said, من ترك الوتر عمدا فهو رجل سوء لا ينبغي أن تقبل شهادته. Imam Ahmad, basically the leader of Madhab Hanbali, he said, whoever leaves al-witr on purpose, then this person is an evil person, and therefore we should not accept and accept their testimony. So let's see right there. Let me right there highlight that quote for you. Here it is. The witr, whoever leaves it intentionally, then in that situation, he said, we should not accept their testimony. So the Prophet ﷺ, in a hadith that was narrated by Abu Dawood, he said, Man lam yutir falaysa minna. The Prophet ﷺ had said, whoever does not pray witr, then he's not from us. So what does that mean, he's not from us? Well, that would mean that the Prophet ﷺ is saying that he's not amongst the chosen ones, not amongst the best ones. Okay, that doesn't mean he had basically left Islam and the border of Islam, but he's basically not of the best ones. Okay, al-witr. Well, the word witr, like we said, it was basically the meaning an odd number, and simply you can look at the number of rak'ahs for witr is either going to be 3 rak'ahs, okay, or it's going to be 5 rak'ahs, or 7, or 9, or 11 rak'ahs, but some had actually said 13 as well. We're going to explain that later on. Okay, so the word rak'ah is basically the unit itself, the unit of prayer. So we're talking about basically قراءة الفاتحة, the takbir, standing, قراءة الفاتحة. We're talking about ruku, we're talking about sujood. That's basically 1 rak'ah. Okay, so it can be 7, or it can be, let's see, 1 rak'ah, 3, 5, 7, 9, or 11 continuous rak'ahs, or we could break them up. Let's see how we can also break them up. Okay, now the timing for al-witr, is basically to be done after Salat al-Isha. So you cannot do witr before Salat al-Isha. You would have to do it after Salat al-Isha. But it's important to say that when you do witr, it has a certain way in how we're going to do a taslim. What is it, taslim? Taslim is basically saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Okay, so when you look at Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, when do we do it? Do we do Salat al-Witr in 2 and by 2, or can we do it as a whole set altogether? That's what we're going to be explaining, inshallah. As for the timing for Salat al-Witr is basically to be done after Isha, and certainly it would last until the Fajr sunrise. And in Sahih, the hadith in the Sahihain, the Prophet ﷺ had said, "Min kulli layli." حطوا لستكم كاسة مي سخنة مع شوية حليب وأعطوها كوكي. Okay. All right. من كل الليل أوتر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من أول الليل وأوسطه وآخره. Sayyidah Aisha had basically explained, and remember, when we say a hadith, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a quote that the Prophet ﷺ had done, but it could also include something that describes a report about the Prophet ﷺ. So Sayyida Aisha had said that the Prophet ﷺ min kulli layli awtara Rasulullah, that the Prophet ﷺ had prayed throughout the night, and at any time throughout the night the Prophet ﷺ had awtara Rasulullah from at the beginning of the night, the middle of the night, and even at the end of the night. In all those areas, the Prophet ﷺ had basically done his witr. Okay, now it's important to keep that in mind, because when we speak about witr, the most important thing is basically doing it after Isha, and certainly you have the whole night to pray witr in, all the way until witruhu ila sahar, until basically Fajr prayer. You can pray it until Fajr prayer. Okay, let's see. There are a number of different hadith that were mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ basically had mentioned or prayed Salat al-Witr all the way throughout the night, except before Isha. Except before Isha. No hadith basically said that the Prophet ﷺ had said or had prayed witr before Salat al-Isha. Okay, and that's why, of course, the Prophet ﷺ had basically delayed Salat al-Witr to be at the end. This is that recommended report, is basically to delay Salat al-Witr till the last timing of your prayer. So in other words, if you wanted to do Qiyam al-Layl, you wanted to do Tahajjud, delay Salat al-Witr to be the last thing that you would pray. So let's see this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, based on a hadith that was narrated by Jabir, أيكم خاف ألا يقوم من آخر الليل فليوتر ثم ليرقد ومن وثق بقيام من الليل فليوتر من آخره فإن قراءة آخر الليل محظورة وذلك أفضل. If any of you is afraid that he may not be able to get up at the end of the night, let him perform the witr prayer and then sleep. And if he is confident of getting up and performing prayer at night, then let him perform it at the end of it. For the recitation of the Quran at the end of the night is witnessed by the angels, which is better. I love the translation that they had done here. I think they did an outstanding job. Okay, so what is that basically recommending? Recommending that we would delay Salat al-Witr, and even if we basically had, let's say, been to a certain extent, of course, we're never going to guarantee that we're going to wake up, but to a certain extent, we knew that we were going to be capable of getting up throughout the night. Maybe we put the alarm, etc., and that we're probably not too heavy in our sleep. Then in that situation, it would be recommended that you would delay witr till after you basically are done with all your night prayers. Okay, till you're done with all your night prayers, delay it till that timing. Okay, that's basically the sunnah. Okay. But if the person was afraid that most likely I'm not going to wake up, or for a number of different reasons, then they can pray witr before they go to sleep. Okay, the least number of rak'ahs that you could do in witr is basically one rak'ah. And there are a hadith that are basically authentic, and to prove that even the Sahaba and even some Sahaba had also prayed witr only one rak'ah. But the best is basically to proceed, and before praying Salat al-Witr is basically to pray Salat al-Shafa' in advance. What does that mean, to pray Salat al-Shafa'? Al-Shafa', we're going to talk about al-Shafa' inshallah. So al-Shafa' is basically that salah that is two rak'ahs before witr. That's basically al-Shafa'. Sorry, it basically scribbled all over. I couldn't stop it. It scribbled on its own. Here we go. I've got it in place. Okay, the highest number of witr that you could do is basically 10 rak'ahs. It's basically, sorry, 11. Did I say 10? Okay, is 11 rak'ahs. And some scholars actually said it is 13. Wait a minute. So how could they confuse 11 and 13? Because some scholars had basically considered that a shafa is part of witr, And other scholars, remember, وَالْفَجْرِ وَلَيَالٍ عَشْرٍ وَالشَّفْعِ وَالْوَتْرِ. That's basically that shafr wal watr. Shafr means 2 rak'ahs. Shafr means 2. Okay? Il-witr means odd number. Okay? Now, some scholars, when they said shafr and then 11 plus 2 is 13. So they considered that 13, including a shafar, and others said, no, a shafar is not to be included in the witr. Does that mean I pray it separately? Well, yes, they considered that you pray it separately. And so did the group that said 13. They said that you could pray it separately, but they didn't include it in the number. That's that 11 right there. They didn't include it in the number, and that's why they came up with the 13 and 11. Okay, so how can we pray with it? You can pray it by 2, so 2 by 2 by 2, and then you would have basically 1 rak'ah remaining, or you could pray it 1, and certainly, let's see, Sayyidah Aisha had said, quote, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يصلي بالليل 11 ركعة يوتر منها بواحدة. That the Prophet ﷺ used to pray 11 rak'ahs, and then the witr would basically be with 1 at the end. Okay, so in other words, he was praying 10 and then basically 1. Yes. Okay. Let's see another one. يسلم بين كل ركعتين ويوتر بواحدة. Another report that the Prophet ﷺ would basically pray 2 rak'ahs, so 2 by 2, okay, and then would pray 1 rak'ah. Okay, can we pray it all together without making it into a sets of 2? You can. Let's say if you wanted to pray those 11 rak'ahs, you would basically pray all together, but you don't do the tashahhud. What is it, tashahhud? Tahiyyatullah, salawat al-tayyibat, etc. You don't do it every 2 rak'ahs. No, you would only do it before the last rak'ah and in the last rak'ah. That's if we're talking about not a 3 rak'ah. Okay? Hold on. If we're talking about not a 3 rak'ah, we're talking about a 5, we're talking about a 7, we're talking about a 9, we're talking about an 11. So in that situation, you're going to do your tashahhud before the last rak'ah that you intend to stop at. Let's say you wanted to do 9, then in the 8th rak'ah you would do tashahhud, and the 9th rak'ah you would do tashahhud. Let's say you wanted to pray 11. You would do the 10th rak'ah to be a place of tashahhud, and the 10th rak'ah and the 11th rak'ah. Okay, you can do it by 2, but we're just telling you what's out there. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ would basically right there, when if he were to pray 11, he would sit for the tashahhud at the 10th, and then basically do that tashahhud and basically do that tashahhud and get up to do the 11th, then do the tashahhud and say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And certainly, like we said, you can actually do it by 2 as well. Let's see, and if you were to do 9 rak'ahs, you would pray all the 8th, and then on the 8th rak'ah you would do that tashahhud, and then on the 9th you would basically do the tashahhud and do Salat Ibrahimiyya, the same thing like we had said before. So it's quite easy right there. Okay, you can do witr in 3 rak'ahs, but, okay, pay attention to this one. You cannot do the 3 rak'ah witr as maghrib. So what does that look like? You would either pray 2 rak'ahs, then say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, basically end it, and then do a separate alone rak'ah. Or, okay, or you would do the 3 rak'ahs all together and only do the tashahhud and the taslim at the end. Okay, so let's see, what can you read and what is preferred to read in al-witr? Basically, in the first one, in the first rak'ah, read سبح اسم ربك الأعلى سبح اسم ربك الأعلى الذي خلق فسوى والذي قدر فهدى. Basically, that surah. Can I read any other surah? You can. You definitely can. Okay? You can read any other surah. And let's see. And in the second rak'ah, قل يا أيها الكافرون. In the second rak'ah, قل يا أيها الكافرون. In the third rak'ah, قل هو الله أحد. Okay? Let's see. And certainly, let's see, now we know that you can pray 11, 13, 9 rak'ahs, 7, 5, and 3 rak'ahs, and even do 1 rak'ah, and certainly the best is 11 rak'ahs. And certainly, it is best to do dua al-qunut. Dua al-qunut basically after ruku'. Can I do it? Can I not do dua al-qunut? You certainly can leave dua al-qunut. Wait a minute, remind me of dua al-qunut again. What was that? اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا برحمتك واصرف عنا شر ما قضيت. That's basically dua al-qunut. Okay? When do we do it again? After ruku'. After ruku'. You would make the ruku' after you stand up from the ruku'. That's when you would basically do dua al-qunut. Do I have to? No, it's a sunnah. You can leave dua al-qunut. Can I do any other dua and not necessarily just dua al-qunut? Can I don't know, pray for Gaza, pray for, you certainly can. Can I do like a dua for myself? I'm struggling right now. You certainly can. That's a place of dua as well. All right. So this is it for Salat al-Witr. Any questions before we move on?
Yes, I actually have a quick question. So,
Go ahead, dear.
and the question is, can we then pray witr just a single rakah and not the shafa'a, not the 2 rakah before? Like say you finish praying Isha prayers and you just pray 1 rakah witr. Is that sufficient?
You certainly can, dear, because a shafa' itself is actually a sunnah. A shafa' is a sunnah. Never will a sunnah become obligatory. Okay? So you can pray just the witr itself, just 1 rak'ah. You certainly can. Any other questions? That's it. Let's move on. Salat al-Tarawih. Salat al-Tarawih is actually one of my favorite. I think, I don't know, I can think of Salat al-Tarawih, especially in al-Masjid al-Aqsa. There's nothing like it, to be honest. I didn't try Medina, so maybe one day I'll try Medina. Okay. But Salat al-Tarawih in al-Masjid al-Aqsa probably was my favorite. Maybe the second place was Salat al-Tarawih in the Pink Masjid, Putra Mosque in Malaysia. I really enjoyed it there. Okay, let's see. So Salat al-Tarawih is exclusive for Ramadan. Exclusive for Ramadan, and it is Sunnah Mu'akkada. What does Sunnah Mu'akkada mean? Sunnah Mu'akkada basically means that the Prophet ﷺ had recommended it and highly recommended it and barely left it. Sunnah Mu'akkada. Why was it called Tarawih anyways? So the word Tarawih in itself actually means to make something as easy. Okay, so why was it called Tarawih? What was easy about it? Because they would pray 2 rak'ahs, in between every 2 or 4 rak'ahs, they would basically take the time to rest and basically do tasbih or do dhikr, okay, between every 4 rak'ahs. So they would make long recitation, and then in between those long rak'ahs, they would basically rest in between. Okay, now doing it in the masjid is definitely preferred, but the Prophet ﷺ himself had prayed it in the masjid, and then at one point he basically came late and did not come to the masjid because he was afraid that it would become obligatory on them, just like in the hadith that is in Sahih al-Bukhari and Muslim, that is Sayyida Aisha had said that the Prophet ﷺ had prayed in the masjid one day, and then the people prayed behind him, and then the night after, and then when the people had basically started combining into more and more numbers on the third and fourth night, that's when the Prophet ﷺ did not go out, and then in the morning, فلما أصبح, meaning in the morning, he said قد رأيت الذي صنعتم فلم يمنعني من الخروج إليكم إلا أني خشيت أن تفرض عليكم. The Prophet ﷺ then said, I saw what you were doing, and nothing but the fear that if that prayer that it might be enjoined on you, and then that's what stopped me from coming to you. In other words, he didn't want it to become obligatory, so he basically did not come out. And that's basically to let us know that Salat al-Tarawih is not a bid'ah to be prayed in the masjid, because the Prophet ﷺ himself actually prayed it in the masjid, and he made it clear that the reason why he wasn't consistent in praying it in the masjid is because he didn't want it to become obligatory and too much for the people to basically handle praying it in the masjid. Let's see. The Sahaba after the Prophet ﷺ, they basically had prayed Salat al-Tarawih after him in the masjid, and it was something that the Sahaba, that the Muslims had basically continued in doing it as a practice. Let's see. The Prophet ﷺ said, إن الرجل إذا قام مع الإمام حتى ينصرف كتب له قيام ليلة. The Prophet ﷺ said, if a person were to pray along with the Imam until the Imam would leave, in other words, if the Imam did not leave and they were still basically praying with the Imam all along, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would consider that as they had prayed throughout the night. And in fact, the Prophet ﷺ had said in the hadith, من قام رمضان إيمانا واحتسابا غفر له ما تقدم من ذنبه. And you could see this hadith is actually authentic, muttafaqun alayh, meaning it was narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, and basically this is one of the most authentic levels of hadith. What did he say? Whoever performs prayer during the nights of Ramadan faithfully, okay, out of sincere faith and hoping for divine reward, not for showing off all of his past sins, would be forgiven. Well, I think the translation was not accurate. Actually, no, the translation is accurate. I confused another hadith. Yes, the translation is accurate. Whoever performs prayer during the nights of Ramadan faithfully, out of sincere faith, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically forgive their sins. Okay, so therefore it is a sunnah thabita. It is basically a sunnah that we have evidence to prove that it was done by the Prophet ﷺ. Let's see the number of rak'ahs. The number of rak'ahs was actually a place of debate, and I would say it's a funny debate because you had conflicting reports on what was really the maximum number that was that Salat al-Tarawih was prayed in. Let's say, so we don't really have one specific report that is evident to prove that the Prophet ﷺ had specified a specific number, 8, 2, 4, so if you wanted to pray Salat al-Tarawih 2, that's all right. You wanted to pray 4, that's all right. You wanted to pray 8, that's all right. You wanted to pray even more, that's all right. But Salat al-Tarawih, you just want to keep in mind that it's a set of 2. It's a set of 2 by 2, and therefore just keep that in mind. And if you wanted to just pray 2, you could do that. It's very common that people think that you could only pray at 8 and no less. That's not actually true. Okay, let's see the maximum number. Now that's that area that the debate that scholars had in regards to Salat al-Tarawih and the maximum number and what is the maximum number. And then you would actually have this debate going as far as considering those that would consider a certain number as committing a bid'ah. It's quite strange how sometimes people are not understanding that the differences of opinions between scholars basically is somehow, I would say, sometimes if we have conflicting reports, then we don't have to be too strict in considering specific numbers, because if we have conflicting reports, then I want you to just relax. There are different reports, and certainly you don't have to consider one opinion, even if you wanted to basically study the hadith and research, and as long as the hadith is not fabricated and made up, then you have to be a little bit inclusive, at least to those differences of opinions. Okay, let's see. Ibn Taymiyyah had said the person can pray 20 rak'ahs. Let's see the quote of Ibn Taymiyyah right there. Let's see if I can find it right there, because this is a very important quote. And Ibn Taymiyyah, he's basically one of those scholars, I would say, that didn't get the appreciation, the respect that he really deserves. And Ibn Taymiyyah was accused of a lot of things, but he's one of those scholars that I guess many had opposed without fully and objectively reading and researching his intelligent mind. Okay, let's see. He said, له أن يصلي 20 ركعة كما هو مشهور من مذهب أحمد، وله أن يصلي 36 كما هو مذهب مالك، وله أن يصلي 11 ركعة و13 ركعة، وكل حسن، ويكون تكثير الركعات أو تقليلها بحسب طول القيام وقصره. Okay, let's see. In quote, he said, a Muslim can perform 20 rak'ahs in the Tarawih prayer, that is, according to the famous opinion in the Hanbali and Shafi'i schools. 36 rak'ah with regard to the Maliki school, 11 or 13 rak'ahs. Thus, all is good, and a Muslim can perform more or less rak'ahs according to the long or short time of his standing reciting the Quran. So just keep that one in mind, and therefore you don't have to be too strict and start fighting. And I would like to say one thing. I'll give you an example. I was in a masjid one time, and in this masjid, it was Salat al-Asr, okay? And everybody got up except one person. This person, she stayed down, sitting down. I basically thought maybe she had her period. That's why she didn't want to get up and pray with everyone else. But it turned out that no. So she opened up her phone and she said, my timing is not now. I said, your timing? Why? When do you pray Salat al-Asr? She said, Salat al-Asr, I pray differently. I said, okay, fair enough. Can you tell me when you pray? She said, my Salat al-Asr is different than your timing, and my timing is in 20 minutes or half an hour from now. I said, why? And she said, because I'm a Hanafi madhab, and I don't regard your madhab as a right madhab. Okay. And this woman was only Muslim for almost 9 months or so. I can't remember the exact timing, but she was a very new Muslim. Okay. And subhanAllah, I mean, it's quite sad that a lot of times certain groups, the first thing they teach to the Muslims is basically those divisions and not how to understand Islam. And the most important thing to understand about Islam is those differences of opinions are valid opinions. Therefore, the unity of the Ummah is even more important. Okay. So let's see. Umar ibn al-Khattab, he was basically the one to make it a habit that people would pray basically in Salat al-Tarawih as a jama'ah. Does that make it a bid'ah? No, it doesn't make it a bid'ah because the Prophet ﷺ had done it before. And Ubay ibn Ka'b, Umar ibn al-Khattab sees him basically continuing the sunnah, the habit that the Prophet ﷺ had done, and he basically continued to be the imam and pray 20 rak'ahs. Okay, and the Sahaba, some would pray more, some would pray less, and certainly it's important to keep in mind, do we have to finish in that masjid the entire Quran? Absolutely not. You don't have to finish the entire Quran. You can actually read as much as you can from the Quran. Can I hold the Quran and read while holding the Quran? You certainly can. Why can I hold the Quran? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَقَرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنْ. So the first, there are differences of opinions, just a note though. The first opinion considered that you should be reading out of memory because they said, فَقَرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنْ. Read what basically is within your capacity to read. Okay. The other scholars, the second opinion, basically said you're supposed to be doing it from your memory. The third opinion said there's a difference between the fard salah and between the voluntary salah. So that's the third opinion, considered that for the fard salah, you have to read out of memory. For the non-fard salah, they considered that you can read while holding the Quran. The fourth opinion, which is also the opinion of Ibn Uthaymeen, basically said there's no difference between the fard salah and the voluntary salah, the obligatory prayer and the non-obligatory prayer. And in both, it said فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنْهُ, and therefore it didn't specify to read something out of memory or to read something basically holding a phone, reading out of your phone if you're basically going to talk about reducing movement and all of that, and probably letting those ayats scroll on their own and you're just basically holding the phone, okay? Or you're probably putting up on a stand perhaps the Quran right in front of you and you're reading directly from the Quran. It's a considerable opinion that you could actually read directly from the Quran, and possibly the most important thing that you want to stay away from is frequent moving. Okay, and that's basically the most important thing. Okay, so can I read directly from the Quran? It's a considerable opinion that you can, and there's no problem with it. Yet, it's important to mention you are not obligated to finish all the Quran during Taraweeh. Okay, they're not. And what happens is that many times people think that you have to read the entire Quran, so they start reading the Quran at a fast pace to the point that sometimes people are not even capable of understanding the recitation. It's a very big problem because the most important thing in the Quran is to read it, is to comprehend it, is to understand it, is to recite in a way that is affecting you spiritually, that is affecting your heart, that is affecting your Islam. That's the most important thing. So reading in tartil is preferred. Wait a minute. So what is tartil? So there are 4 different paces for reciting the Quran. 4 different paces. Let's write that down. Okay. The first pace is basically called, let's do it right there. It's basically called al-Hadr. Al-Hadr is basically a fast pace. Usually, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. That's basically making sure that you're reciting every single letter, you're pronouncing every single letter and every single harakah, and you're connecting all those ayat together. The second one is basically tadweer, a little slower than al-Hadr. And let me make this big enough for you to see. Okay, here we go. It-tadweer is a little slower. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. Here's it tadweer. Let's see for the faster one, or a little faster is basically, how do we get this? Doesn't want to. I'll just do it right here. Is basically tartil. Tartil is slower. So sorry, I tried to put it up here, but maybe we could do it. Oh, there we go. Okay, there we go. Okay. التدوير is الترتيل, sorry, is basically a little slower. And بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. That's ترتيل. التحقيق is the super slow ones. You know how the famous reciters, المنشاوي, or probably, they would make it duha, and they would basically read really slow. Okay, I'm not the best at this. Okay, so that's basically tahqiq. And certainly you can read in all paces, but the preferred one is basically at-tartil. Can you read in al-hadr? You certainly can, on a condition that the words are recited right, that the Quran is recited right, and because the Quran was basically revealed for us to comprehend and not necessarily go over the words and the letters with not even understanding something. Can I hold the Quran and start reading the English translation as the Imam is reading the Quran in Arabic? Preferred not. Why preferred not? Because you want to focus on the Quran itself and not recite the translation. It's kind of like imagining that you are reading perhaps maybe a book of fiqh or a book of hadith while you're praying. That's definitely not acceptable. So, or a book of tafsir, because the translation of the Quran is not the Quran. Okay? The translation is an exegesis, it's a tafsir, just as it would not be acceptable for me to hold a book of tafsir while I'm standing to pray. It would also not be acceptable to read the translation while you're reading the Quran, or at least while you're praying, or the Imam is probably reading and you're probably reading the translation. So what should I do? Possibly you can have that translation probably beforehand, get an idea of what is translated, what is going to be recited, get an idea, and probably learn. I had taught, it's called 80 words, or the most, I think it was 80% of the frequently used words in the Quran, and it was only in 36 pages, by the way, and I had taught that in 14 different classes. It's available on YouTube, and believe it or not, in just a couple classes, 80% of the words that appear in the Quran, I translated them, I explained their place of usage, and I even had children then, after taking that class, actually translate the ayat that would come in the Quran. And I had, wallahi, 8-year-old kids. I would read the ayah and I would say, can you translate it for me? After taking basically those 80% frequently attended words in the Quran, the 80% of it, and they were capable of translating to a certain level of a good translation, and definitely recommend that, because if you can get an 8-year-old to translate just by taking those couple pages. It was just in 14 pages, by the way, but 36 different boxes. Okay. Or you can, make them into those 36 boxes, every single box, put it on a page, but it wasn't really hard. Okay. And you can understand the Quran because the words are very limited. Okay. and it's going to be really easy for you to pray and then probably understand what is being said. Okay, if we're seeing right now people actually learning several languages, it's not going to be hard to just learn the most frequent words in the Quran and basically understand it to a certain level. All right. So this is it. Inshallah, subhanakallah wa bihamdik. نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. If there are any questions, really quick, we could, inshallah, answer the questions because I gotta go for a very long drive to take my mother-in-law to her doctor's appointment. Any questions before I basically sign off?
I'm sorry, can someone just please put the title of your book that you just mentioned on the chat?
Which book? You mean the frequently asked?
Yes, yes, yes.
Oh, you know what? Let me get that for you. You want the videos or you want the book?
Both actually.
The whole thing? Yeah, okay,
Yes.
hold on. Yeah, sure. Let's see. I think it was called 80 frequent words. I'm gonna put it right there. I'm gonna search for it right now. Frequent words, Quran, PDF. Okay, let's see. Here we go. There you go. You got it right there. Is this it? Boom, right there. You got it. See it? And I'll put it for you on the chat right there. And here it is. And that's basically it. And
Thank you.
yeah, there you go. And you know what? And I have the YouTube videos. Let me see on YouTube right there. And let's see. Okay, hold on. Let me get you the YouTube videos. And I'm gonna pull it right there. Aisha was possibly 80 frequent words, Quran, and I'm going to put YouTube. Here we go. You got it right there. See it?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
You got it right there. See it? And you got it right there. Inshallah, it's going to be easy. And let's see. Yeah. Let me see. Those aren't. Hold on. Let me see. I'll also send you, there's a playlist. Find the playlist. And inshallah, there's the playlist that you can find to get those. And it's just in 14 videos. And I promise you, you're gonna be able to understand a lot, like 80% of what you're reading in the Quran. That's actually great. But you really gotta do, you're gonna take we're gonna watch those videos. You're gonna take that packet, you're gonna print it out, you're gonna memorize those words, and you're gonna memorize that vocabulary, and boom, you got it right there. Inshallah, it's gonna be really easy.
Inshallah. I'm actually so excited now. Thank you.
All right. So this is it, everybody. Inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And inshallah, it's gonna be a safe drive. It's a very long drive, almost a 50-minute drive. So yeah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.